The stagecoach lurched to a halt at the edge of Dust Creek, Wyoming territory, its wheels grinding against the dirt road with a final, weary protest. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the weathered buildings that lined the main street. From within the coach emerged a young woman, her traveling dress coated in a fine layer of dust that spoke of days on the trail. In her arms, she clutched a small child, no more than 3 years old, whose tired eyes blinked against the harsh light. Eliza Monroe stood on the wooden platform, feeling the weight of 100 curious stares from the townsfolk who had paused their daily business to observe the newcomer. She was 26, though the lines around her eyes suggested a woman who had lived through more years than her age would indicate. Her dark hair, once carefully pinned, now hung in loose tendrils around her face, and her green eyes held a wariness that seemed permanently etched into their depths. "Ma'am, your trunk," the driver called down, his voice rough from tobacco and trail dust. He hefted a worn leather case from the coach's roof and set it beside her with little ceremony before climbing back to his perch. "Thank you," Eliza murmured, though her voice was nearly lost in the creak of wheels as the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her standing alone with her child and meager possessions. The whispers began almost immediately. 2 women in calico dresses leaned together near the general store, their words carrying on the dry wind. "Another widow from back east, I'd wager," one said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Third one this year. Look at those eyes," her companion added. "That one's running from something. Mark my words, they always are." Eliza pulled her son closer, feeling his small body tremble against her chest. Thomas, she called him Tommy, had been quiet throughout their long journey, as if he understood that their old life was behind them now, buried with his father in a grave she hoped never to see again. She had inquired about work before leaving Denver, and the name of Boone Calder's horse station had come up more than once. "He needs help," they'd said, "but he's particular about who he hires. Lives alone up on the plateau, about 5 miles north of town. Doesn't come down much." The walk to the station would be long, especially carrying Tommy and dragging her trunk. But Eliza had learned that determination could carry a person farther than comfort ever could. She approached an older man sitting outside the saloon, his weathered face suggesting years of frontier living. "Pardon me, sir," she began, forcing strength into her voice. "Could you direct me to the Calder horse station?" The man squinted at her, taking in her eastern clothes and the child in her arms. "That's a fair piece up the north road. Ma'am, you got business with Boone? I've heard he might have work available." A dry chuckle escaped the man's lips. "Boone Calder don't take to strangers much, especially—" He paused, his eyes flickering to Tommy. "Well, it's your business, I suppose. Follow the road north till you see the split pine, then bear west. Can't miss it, only building for miles." As Eliza made her way through town, she caught fragments of conversation that followed in her wake. A widow, they all assumed, and they weren't wrong. But the circumstances of her widowhood, those she would take to her grave if necessary. The road north stretched before her, winding through sagebrush and scattered juniper. Tommy walked for a while, his small legs pumping determinedly, but soon grew tired. Eliza fashioned a sling from her shawl and carried him on her hip, dragging the trunk behind her with her free hand. The sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and purple. By the time she spotted the split pine the old man had mentioned, her arms ached and her feet burned inside her unsuitable eastern boots. The horse station sat on a rise, commanding a view of the surrounding plateau. It was a solid structure of logs and stone, built to withstand the harsh Wyoming winters. Smoke curled from the chimney, the only sign of life in the gathering dusk. Eliza set Tommy down and smoothed her dress as best she could before approaching the main house. Her knock echoed in the stillness, followed by the sound of heavy boots on wooden floors. The door swung open, and she found herself looking up at one of the largest men she had ever encountered. Boone Calder stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders filling the doorframe. His face was weathered like old leather, with lines that spoke of squinting into too many suns and bearing too many sorrows. Dark hair, touched with premature gray at the temples, hung past his collar. But it was his eyes that struck her most, gray as winter storm clouds and just as cold. "Mr. Calder," Eliza ventured, trying to keep her voice steady under that penetrating gaze. "What do you want?" His voice was low, gravelly, as if he wasn't accustomed to speaking much. "I've come about work, sir. I heard in town that you might need help with—" She gestured vaguely toward the station, suddenly aware of how presumptuous she must seem, appearing at his door as night fell. Boone's eyes narrowed, taking in her appearance, the Eastern dress, the child clinging to her skirts, the exhaustion she couldn't quite hide. "I don't need help," he said flatly. "Especially not from a woman with a child. This ain't no place for either of you." He began to close the door, but desperation made Eliza bold. She stepped forward, placing her hand on the rough wood. "Please, Mr. Calder, I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, tend animals. I'm not afraid of difficult work." The answer's no. His tone brooked no argument, but he paused, his gaze dropping to Tommy, who stared up at him with wide, solemn eyes. Something flickered across Boone's face, not quite softness, but perhaps a memory of softer times. "It's getting dark," Eliza pressed on. "We've walked 5 miles from town. Surely you wouldn't turn away a woman and child without shelter for the night." Boone stood silent for a long moment, his jaw working as if chewing on words he wouldn't speak. Finally, he jerked his head toward the barn. "There's hay in the loft. You can bed down there for tonight. Come morning, you go back to town." "Thank you," Eliza breathed, but he had already turned away, the door closing with a finality that echoed across the empty plateau. The barn was warmer than the outside air, filled with the comforting scents of horses and fresh hay. Eliza found a relatively clean corner of the loft and fashioned a makeshift bed from loose straw. Tommy curled against her, his thumb in his mouth, a habit she thought he'd broken months ago. "Are we home, Mama?" he whispered. Eliza stroked his hair, feeling the familiar ache in her chest. "We're safe, sweetheart. That's what matters." As Tommy drifted off to sleep, Eliza lay awake, listening to the horses shifting in their stalls below and the wind rattling the barn doors. Through a gap in the wall, she could see light from the main house, where Boone Calder presumably sat alone with whatever ghosts kept him company. She had fled one kind of isolation only to find another, but this isolation, cold and unwelcoming as it was, didn't leave bruises. It didn't wake her in the night with hands around her throat. It didn't threaten her child. The night grew deeper, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the ache in her own heart. But Eliza had learned that loneliness could be borne. It was the alternative that had become unbearable. In the main house, Boone Calder sat before his fire, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. He could see the barn from his window, knew the woman and child huddled in his hayloft. It had been 3 years since he'd had anyone on the property besides the occasional horse trader or supply runner. 3 years since. He cut off the thought, downing the whiskey in one burning swallow. Tomorrow, he'd send them on their way. He had no room in his life for complications, especially not a pretty widow with sad eyes and a story she wasn't telling. He'd learned the hard way that caring for people only led to loss, and he'd had his fill of loss to last a lifetime. But as he prepared for bed, Boone found himself gathering extra blankets from his trunk, thick wool ones that would ward off the high country chill. He'd leave them by the barn door. He decided. No sense in the child catching cold. Come morning, they'd be gone, and his life would return to its careful emptiness. The storm rolled in just after midnight, bringing with it snow that shouldn't have come so early in the season. Boone woke to the sound of wind shrieking around the corners of the house and knew immediately that no one would be traveling to town come morning. The passes would be treacherous, if not impossible. He lay in the darkness, cursing the weather, cursing his luck, and most of all, cursing the twist of fate that had brought Eliza Munro to his door on this particular night. Because now he'd have to let them into his house, into his carefully guarded space, and he had a feeling that once that boundary was crossed, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The pounding on the barn door jolted Eliza from fitful sleep. Snow had found its way through the gaps in the walls, dusting their makeshift bed with white. Tommy whimpered against her chest, his small body shivering despite the blankets they'd found by the door in the early morning hours. "Get to the house," Boone's voice cut through the howling wind. "Now!" Eliza didn't need to be told twice. She bundled Tommy in her arms and stumbled through the knee-deep snow, following Boone's broad back as he broke a path to the main house. The journey that had seemed short the night before now felt endless, with ice crystals stinging her face and the wind threatening to tear Tommy from her arms. Inside, the warmth hit her like a physical force. Boone slammed the door against the storm and turned to face them, snow melting in his dark hair. "Sit by the fire," he ordered gruffly, already moving to add more logs to the hearth. Eliza sank onto the rough wooden bench near the fireplace. Tommy still clutched against her. The boy's lips had taken on a bluish tinge that sent fear shooting through her heart. She rubbed his hands between hers, whispering reassurances he was too cold to hear. "Here." Boone thrust a heavy quilt at her, then disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen. He returned with a pot of coffee that had been warming on the stove. "Give the boy some. It's mostly milk anyway." His gruffness couldn't quite hide the concern in his movements as he watched her coax Tommy to drink. The warm liquid brought color back to the child's cheeks, and soon he was looking around the room with curious eyes. "Thank you," Eliza said softly, meeting Boone's gaze over Tommy's head. He turned away as if her gratitude burned him. "Storm'll last 2, maybe 3 days. You'll stay in here." It wasn't a question. "There's a room off the kitchen. Used to be for the hired hand. You and the boy can use it. I can work for our keep," Eliza offered quickly. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm not afraid of hard work." Boone studied her for a long moment, taking in her determined expression and the way she held herself despite exhaustion. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir." "Then you can start with breakfast. Supplies are in the larder." He gestured toward the kitchen. "I've got horses to tend." He pulled on a heavy coat and ventured back into the storm, leaving Eliza alone in his house. She took a moment to absorb her surroundings. The main room was sparse but clean, with handmade furniture that spoke of practicality over comfort. No pictures adorned the walls. No personal touches softened the space. It was the home of a man who had stripped his life down to essentials. Tommy had recovered enough to explore, and Eliza let him wander while she investigated the kitchen. The larder was well stocked with preserved meats, dried beans, flour, and canned goods. She set about making a hearty breakfast, finding comfort in the familiar motions of cooking. By the time Boone returned, stamping snow from his boots, she had biscuits in the oven and bacon sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. He stopped in the doorway, something unreadable crossing his face at the domestic scene. "Smells good," he admitted grudgingly, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. They ate in relative silence, broken only by Tommy's occasional chatter about the horsies he could see from the window. Boone seemed unsure how to respond to the child's enthusiasm, offering only brief nods and the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. Over the following days, they settled into an uneasy routine. Eliza cooked and cleaned, finding satisfaction in bringing order to Boone's bachelor dwelling. She noticed things, how he favored his left shoulder, suggesting an old injury, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. Speaking of nights spent with a whiskey bottle, the careful distance he maintained, as if proximity to another human might crack something inside him. For his part, Boone assigned her tasks with minimal words. "Need water from the well. Horses need grain. Mend that harness if you can." But she caught him watching her sometimes, a puzzled expression on his weathered face, as if he couldn't quite figure out how she'd come to be in his kitchen, humming softly while she worked. The first crack in his armor came on the third night of the storm. Eliza had put Tommy to bed and was darning one of Boone's shirts by lamplight when she heard the noise, a strangled shout from the main bedroom. Without thinking, she rose and moved toward the sound. She found Boone twisted in his sheets, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool night air, and his hands clutched at invisible enemies. "No, Samuel, get down!" Eliza hesitated only a moment before approaching the bed. She'd lived with a violent man long enough to know the difference between intentional harm and unconscious thrashing. Gently, she placed a hand on Boone's shoulder. "Mr. Calder, Boone, you're dreaming." His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, he didn't seem to see her. Then recognition dawned, followed quickly by embarrassment and anger. "What are you doing in here? You cried out. I thought—" She stepped back, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being in his bedroom. "I apologize. I'll go." "Wait." The word came out rough, almost against his will. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The boy, did I wake him?" "No, he sleeps sound." Boone nodded, his gaze fixed on his hands. "It's the storm," he said finally. "Sounds like artillery sometimes. Takes me back." The war? A bitter laugh escaped him. "What else? 3 years since Appomattox, and I still—" He cut himself off, jaw clenching. Eliza knew she should leave, but something in his voice held her. "My husband fought too," she offered quietly. "For the Union. He came back different. We all came back different." Boone muttered, then, seeming to realize he'd said too much, he straightened. "Go back to bed. Mrs. Monroe, this won't happen again." But it did happen again. The very next night, this time, when she heard the sounds of distress, she simply made coffee and left a cup outside his door. In the morning, she found the empty cup on the kitchen table, washed and dried. As the storm finally began to weaken, Eliza noticed other changes. Boone started taking his meals with them instead of eating alone by the fire. He began responding to Tommy's constant questions about horses with more than monosyllables, even allowing the boy to help him measure out grain for the animals. One afternoon, while Boone was checking on the horses, Eliza ventured into the small storage room off the main area, searching for extra lamp oil. She discovered a trunk pushed into the corner. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing the corner of what looked like a military uniform. Unable to resist, she knelt and opened the trunk fully. Inside lay the remnants of another life, a Confederate uniform, carefully folded, a packet of letters tied with string, a daguerreotype of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Boone, though softer somehow, unmarked by war and loss. "You shouldn't be in here," Eliza startled, turning to find Boone filling the doorway. His face had gone hard, the tentative warmth of recent days vanishing like smoke. "I'm sorry, I was looking for lamp oil and—" "That's Samuel." His voice was flat, emotionless. "My brother died at Chancellorsville." "I'm sorry," she repeated, meaning it. She knew the weight of loss, how it could hollow out a person from the inside. Boone moved past her and closed the trunk firmly. "Lamp oil's in the kitchen cupboard, bottom shelf." That evening, the silence at dinner was heavier than usual. Tommy, sensing the tension, was uncommonly quiet after putting him to bed. Eliza found Boone sitting before the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I didn't mean to pry," she began. "Doesn't matter." He took a sip, eyes fixed on the flames. "You'll be leaving soon anyway. Storm's breaking." Something twisted in Eliza's chest at the reminder. Despite the awkwardness, despite Boone's gruff manner, she'd felt safer here than she had in months. The thought of returning to town, of facing the whispers and speculation, of trying to build a life under the weight of strangers' judgment. What if I didn't leave? The words escaped before she could stop them. Boone turned to look at her, eyebrows raised. "What?" Heat flooded her cheeks, but she pressed on. "You need help here. I can see it. The house needs tending. Meals need cooking. You can't manage everything alone." "Been managing fine for 3 years. Have you?" She gestured around the sparse room. "When's the last time you had a proper meal before I came? When's the last time those windows were cleaned or the floors properly scrubbed?" His jaw worked, but he said nothing. "I'm not asking for charity," Eliza continued. "I'll work for room and board for Tommy and me. You don't even have to pay wages if—" "Why?" The word cut through her rambling. "Why stay here, isolated from everything, working for nothing but food and shelter? What are you running from, Mrs. Monroe?" The question hung between them like a blade. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She'd learned to hide her emotions, to present a calm face no matter what storm raged inside. "The same thing you are, I think," she said quietly. "The past." They stared at each other across the flickering firelight. Finally. Boone drained his glass and stood. "The hired hand's room is yours if you want it. $30 a month plus board. You cook, clean, help with the horses when needed. The boy stays out of my way when I'm working." "Thank you," Eliza breathed. "Don't thank me yet," he warned, moving toward his room. "This life, it's not easy. The isolation gets to people. Come spring, you'll probably be begging to leave." But as Eliza settled into her narrow bed that night, listening to the dying wind outside, she knew he was wrong. The isolation didn't frighten her. It was a blessing. Here, miles from anyone, she could stop looking over her shoulder. She could stop jumping at sudden movements. She could begin to remember who she'd been before fear had reshaped her into someone she barely recognized. In his own room, Boone lay awake, already regretting his impulsive decision. He'd built these walls around himself for a reason, and now he'd invited someone inside them. A woman with secrets in her eyes and a child who looked at him like he might be worth trusting. He thought of Samuel, of the promises they'd made before marching off to war. "We'll come back," Samuel had said, grinning with the confidence of youth. "We'll find wives, raise families on neighboring farms. Our children will grow up together." But Samuel hadn't come back, and Boone had returned so changed that the girl waiting for him had taken one look at his empty eyes and married another. He'd retreated here, to this plateau where the wind scoured away everything but survival. Now Eliza Monroe had appeared like a ghost from the life he might have had, and he was fool enough to let her stay. Come morning, he told himself, he'd establish clear boundaries. He'd make sure she understood this was a business arrangement, nothing more. But even as he made these resolutions, he knew it was already too late. She'd made coffee during his nightmares. She'd looked at Samuel's picture with genuine sorrow. She'd stood up to him when he'd tried to send her away. Damn her for making him remember what it felt like to not be alone. Spring arrived slowly on the plateau, revealing the landscape in stages as snow retreated to the higher elevations. With the thaw came visitors, traders, neighbors checking fence lines, and, inevitably, gossip from town. Eliza had been at the station for nearly 2 months when Jack Morrison, the freight hauler, brought more than just supplies. Boone called her, keeping a woman. Jack's weathered face split into a grin as he unloaded sacks of flour from his wagon. Never thought I'd see the day. Boone's expression darkened as he hefted a sack onto his shoulder. She's hired help. Jack, nothing more. Sure, sure. Jack's eyes twinkled with mischief. Pretty young widow, living under your roof. Folks in town are having a field day with that news. Let them talk, Boone growled. But Eliza, watching from the kitchen window, saw his jaw tighten. That evening, she noticed Boone's increased distance. He took his supper outside, claiming the horses needed tending, and avoided her eyes when she tried to make conversation. The easy rhythm they'd developed over the winter months seemed to fracture under the weight of outside scrutiny. "Mr. Calder," Eliza ventured when he came in after dark. "If my presence here is causing you difficulty, it's not." His tone was sharp enough to cut. "People will always find something to jaw about. Let them." But the damage was done. The reminder of how their arrangement must look to others had restored the walls between them. Eliza retreated to her own careful distance, speaking only when necessary, keeping Tommy from bothering Boone during his work. It was Tommy who finally broke through, as children often do. One afternoon, while Eliza was hanging laundry, the boy wandered into the barn where Boone was working with a particularly stubborn mare. What happened next? Eliza would only piece together from the aftermath. She heard the scream first, high and terrified, followed by the thunder of hooves and Boone's shout. Racing to the barn, she found Boone pressed against a stall, Tommy sheltered behind his body, while the mare kicked and reared in panic. "Stay back," Boone ordered, never taking his eyes off the horse. He spoke in low, steady tones, gradually calming the animal while keeping Tommy protected. When the mare finally settled, he scooped the boy up and carried him out, his face white beneath its tan. "Is he hurt?" Eliza reached for her son, checking him frantically for injuries. "He's fine. Scared is all." Boone's hands were shaking as he passed Tommy to her. "Fool boy startled her. Could have been killed." "Tommy, what were you thinking?" Eliza's relief sharpened into anger. "You know you're not allowed in the barn alone." "Wanted to help Mr. Boone," Tommy whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Like he said I could." "I never said," Boone started, then stopped, because he had said it, weeks ago, when Tommy had pestered him about the horses. "When you're older," he'd promised, not thinking the boy would remember. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Eliza found Boone sitting on the porch, a bottle beside him that he hadn't touched. "Thank you," she said simply, settling beside him on the rough bench. "He could have died." The words came out raw. "Split second later and that hoof would have, but he didn't, because of you." Boone's laugh was bitter. "I'm no good with children. Don't know why I thought." Samuel was the one who was good with young ones. Had a way with them. It was the most he'd ever volunteered about his brother. Eliza waited, having learned that silence sometimes drew out more than questions. "He was 20, Boone continued, staring out at the darkening sky. "Younger than me by 3 years. Should have made him stay home, but he was determined. Said it was our duty." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Found him after the battle. Took me 2 days of searching among the dead." "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered, the words inadequate but necessary. "He was the best of us. Kind, funny, full of plans for after the war. Had a girl waiting, Mary Catherine. She married a shopkeeper last year. Can't say I blame her." They sat in companionable silence, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. Finally, Boone spoke again. "Your husband, how did he die?" Eliza's breath caught. She'd known this question would come eventually, had practiced answers in her mind. But sitting here in the darkness, with this man who just trusted her with his own pain, the prepared lies crumbled. There was violence," she said carefully. "In our home. It ended badly." She felt rather than saw Boone turn to look at her. "He hurt you?" A nod was all she could manage. "And Tommy, I protected him, always." The fierce certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. Boone was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Good." That single word held more understanding than hours of explanation might have achieved. They sat together until the night grew cold, neither speaking. But something fundamental had shifted between them. Over the following weeks, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Boone began teaching Tommy about horses properly, how to approach them, how to read their moods, how to stay safe. The boy bloomed under the attention, following Boone around like a devoted shadow. "You're good with him," Eliza observed one afternoon, watching Boone show Tommy how to brush a gentle old gelding. "He's not as foolish as most children," Boone replied, but she caught the pleased look that crossed his face. The work fell into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were for chores, Eliza in the house, Boone with the horses, Tommy helping where he could. Afternoons might find them working together, mending fences or tending the vegetable garden Eliza had insisted on starting. Evenings were for quiet companionship, Boone carving or mending tack while Eliza sewed and Tommy played with the wooden horses Boone had begun crafting for him. It was during one of these peaceful evenings that everything changed again. Eliza had been struggling with a particularly stubborn knot in her thread when Boone reached over to help. Their fingers brushed as he took the sewing from her, and suddenly the air in the room felt charged. She looked up to find him staring at her, something unguarded in his expression. "Eliza," he said, her given name unfamiliar on his lips. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and fear in equal measure. Then Tommy stirred in his sleep on the rug by the fire, breaking the spell. Boone handed back her sewing and retreated to his chair, but the awareness remained, humming beneath the surface of their daily interactions. The next test came with the arrival of Reverend Walsh from town. He appeared on a bright May morning, his horse picking its way carefully up the rutted road. "Mr. Calder," he greeted, dismounting with practiced ease. "I thought it was time I paid a visit." Boone's face closed off immediately. "Reverend, what brings you out here?" "Concern for souls, as always." The Reverend's eyes found Eliza in the garden, Tommy playing nearby. "Mrs. Monroe, isn't it? I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Eliza straightened, wiping soil from her hands. She recognized the type, righteous men who believed they knew best how others should live. "Reverend," she acknowledged warily, "I've heard you've taken employment here." Walsh continued, his tone carefully neutral. "It's good that Mr. Calder has help, of course, but I wonder if you've considered the appearance of your arrangement." "What appearance would that be?" Boone's voice carried a warning that the Reverend chose to ignore. "A young widow, a bachelor living alone. Surely you can see how tongues might wag. For the sake of propriety, and the child's moral upbringing. Get off my land." Boone stepped forward, placing himself between the Reverend and Eliza. "Now, Mr. Calder, I'm only trying to— You're trying to stick your nose where it doesn't belong. Mrs. Monroe works for me. She's a decent woman doing honest work. Anyone who says otherwise can answer to me." The Reverend's face flushed. "There's no need for threats. Mr. Calder, I simply thought perhaps Mrs. Monroe might be more comfortable with a position in town. Mrs. Pemberton needs help with her boarding house. I'm quite comfortable here, thank you." Eliza interjected, moving to stand beside Boone. "Mr. Calder has been nothing but respectful and proper. I won't have his reputation questioned on my account." Walsh looked between them, taking in their united front. "I see. Well, I'll pray for wisdom for you both." After he left, Eliza found she was trembling. Boone noticed and gently guided her to the porch steps. "Pay him no mind," he said gruffly. "Self-righteous fool. But he's right, isn't he, about how it looks?" Eliza wrapped her arms around herself. "I've brought scandal to your door." "I don't give a damn about scandal." The vehemence in his voice surprised them both. "You've brought—" He stopped, struggling for words. "This place was dead before you came. Just me and the ghosts. Now it's alive again." Eliza looked up at him, seeing the vulnerability he so rarely showed. "Boone, I know you've got secrets," he continued, looking away. "Things you're not telling. That's fine. We've all got our demons. But don't leave because of what others think." "Not if you don't want to." "I don't want to," she admitted softly. That night, sleep eluded Eliza. She stood at her window, looking out at the moonlit landscape, when movement caught her eye. Boone was by the corral, working with one of the younger horses. She watched him move with patient confidence, gentling the skittish animal, and felt something shift in her chest. For months, she'd told herself she was here for Tommy, for safety, for shelter, but watching Boone in the moonlight, she couldn't deny the truth any longer. Somewhere between the winter storms and spring thaw, she'd begun to heal, and somewhere in that healing, she'd begun to feel things she'd thought were lost forever. The sound of her door opening made her turn. Tommy stood in his nightshirt, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Can't sleep, sweetheart?" "Had a dream," he mumbled, "about Papa." Eliza's blood chilled. Tommy rarely mentioned his father, and she'd been grateful for the silence. "What kind of dream?" He was angry, like before. The boy's lower lip trembled. "But then, Mr. Boone came and made him go away. Eliza pulled her son close, feeling the rapid beat of his small heart. Papa's gone, remember? He can't hurt us anymore. Mister, Boone won't let him, Tommy said with the certainty of childhood. He promised to keep us safe. When did he promise that? When he's teaching me about horses, he says a man protects what's his. Eliza's throat tightened. We're not his, Tommy. We just work here. Tommy pulled back to look at her with eyes too wise for his years. I wish we were, he said simply, then padded back to bed. Eliza remained at the window long after, watching Boone work with endless patience, and wondered if wishes spoken in darkness might sometimes find their way to truth. The drought began in June, creeping across the plateau like a slow-moving curse. The grass turned brittle beneath the relentless sun, and the creek that fed Boone's well dwindled to a trickle. By July, they were rationing water, and the tension in the household grew as thick as the dust that coated everything. Boone's mood darkened with each rainless day. He drove himself harder, hauling water from a spring 2 miles away, trying to keep the horses healthy while the land baked around them. Eliza watched him grow thinner, the lines around his eyes deepening as worry ate at him. You need to rest, she told him one evening as he stumbled in after dark, covered in dust and sweat. Rest won't bring rain, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. Sorry, just tired. We all are. She handed him a cup of water, carefully measured. But killing yourself won't help. Their eyes met across the dim kitchen, and she saw the fear there, not for himself, but for his horses, his livelihood, for them. If this keeps up, I can't pay you, he said quietly. Can't even feed. Stop. Eliza set down the cup with more force than necessary. We're not here for the money, and you know it. Then why are you here? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before Eliza could answer, Tommy burst through the door. Mr. Boone, come quick, Star's down. They raced to the barn to find the pregnant mare lying on her side, breathing heavily. Boone knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he examined her. Too early, he muttered. She's not due for weeks yet. For hours they worked together, Eliza following Boone's terse instructions. Tommy relegated to fetching what little water they could spare. The mare's struggles grew weaker as the night wore on. She's giving up, Eliza whispered. No. Boone's voice was fierce. Not while I'm breathing. His determination was contagious. Eliza found herself murmuring encouragement to the mare, stroking her neck while Boone worked. When the foal finally came, weak but alive, she felt tears on her cheeks. A filly, Boone breathed. His face transformed with wonder as the tiny creature struggled to stand. Tough little thing, like her mama, Eliza said, watching Star nuzzle her baby. Like you, Boone said softly, then seemed to catch himself. Both of you need to get some sleep. I'll stay with them. But Eliza didn't go. Instead, she settled in the straw near him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I'll keep you company. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the foal take its first shaky steps. The barn was stifling in the July heat, but neither moved. My wife would have loved this, Boone said suddenly. Catherine, before the war, she always said new life was God's promise that the world would keep turning. Eliza's heart clenched. He'd never mentioned a wife. What happened? I came back different, angry, couldn't sleep without nightmares, couldn't stand sudden noises. She tried, but, he shrugged. Some things can't be mended. She married a shopkeeper, has 3 children now. Do you miss her? I miss who we were, young, foolish, thinking love could survive anything. He turned to look at her. What about you? Did you love him, before? Eliza considered the question. I thought I did. He was charming, said all the right things. My parents were thrilled. He had prospects, came from a good family. It wasn't until after the wedding that I saw what lay beneath. How long? 6 years. The words tasted bitter. 6 years of walking on eggshells, of hiding bruises, of making excuses. When he started looking at Tommy with that same anger, she trailed off. Unable to finish, Boone's hand found hers in the straw, his fingers rough but gentle. You protected your boy. Nothing else matters. They sat that way until dawn, hands linked, watching new life take hold in a dying land. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of heat and worry. The well ran lower, the horses grew listless, and tempers frayed like old rope. It was during one particularly brutal afternoon that everything came to a head. Eliza was trying to stretch their meager water supply to cook dinner when Boone stormed in, his face thunderous. 3 more horses down, he snarled. At this rate, I'll lose them all. We'll manage. No, we won't. He slammed his fist on the table, making Tommy flinch. Don't you understand? Without the horses, there's nothing, no livelihood, no way to support. He cut himself off, running his hands through his hair. You should leave. Take the boy and go while you still can. Go where? Eliza's own temper flared. Back to town where they whisper about the widow with secrets? To another man who might... She stopped, breathing hard. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? That we're a burden? That you regret taking us in? I regret... He stopped, jaw working. I regret caring what happens to you. The words hung between them like a physical blow. Tommy started to cry, and Eliza automatically moved to comfort him. But her eyes stayed on Boone. I see, she said quietly. Come, Tommy, let's pack our things. No. Boone blocked the doorway. That's not... I didn't mean... Then what did you mean? He looked at her with haunted eyes. I meant that caring hurts. I swore I wouldn't. After Samuel, after Catherine. I swore I was done with caring. Then you showed up with those sad eyes and that brave chin. And your boy who looks at me like I'm something special, and I... He stopped, seeming to realize what he was saying. And you... what? Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. And I'm scared. The admission seemed torn from him. Scared of losing you like I lost everything else. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Eliza stepped forward, Tommy still in her arms, and placed her free hand on Boone's chest. You won't lose us, she said firmly. Not to drought, not to gossip, not to anything. We're tougher than that. Eliza, no, listen to me. We've both been running from ghosts. Maybe it's time we stopped running and started fighting. Together. Boone's hand covered hers, and for a moment they stood frozen. A makeshift family bound by something stronger than blood or law. Then Tommy squirmed between them. Are we staying? He asked hopefully. Boone looked down at the boy, then back at Eliza. If your mama will have me, have us, this place, I mean, she will, Eliza said softly. That night, the tension between them was palpable. Every accidental touch sent sparks through the air. When their hands brushed passing a dish at dinner, when Boone steadied her as she stumbled on the porch steps, when she reached past him for the water bucket, each moment was charged with awareness. After Tommy was asleep, Eliza found herself restless. She wandered outside, drawn by the faint breeze that promised nothing but more heat. She found Boone by the corral, staring up at the cloudless sky. Can't sleep either, she asked. He shook his head. Keep thinking if I watch hard enough, I'll see clouds forming. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Boone, what you said earlier. Forget it. Heat makes everyone say things they don't mean. But you did mean it. She turned to face him. Just like I meant it when I said we're not leaving. He looked at her then. Really looked. And what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Eliza, Thunder rumbled in the distance, cutting off his words. They both turned, hardly daring to hope, as lightning flickered on the horizon. Is that rain? Boone breathed. By God, that's rain coming. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of moisture. They stood transfixed as the storm rolled toward them across the plateau, lightning illuminating massive thunderheads. The first drops hit just as Boone turned to her, his face alive with joy. "Rain! Eliza! We're saved!" She laughed, throwing her head back to catch the drops on her face. "It's beautiful." "You're beautiful," he said, then seemed surprised by his own words. They stood staring at each other as the drops became a downpour, soaking them in seconds. Eliza's hair plastered to her head, her dress clinging. But she didn't care. She was watching Boone watch her, seeing the walls he'd built finally crumbling. "Eliza," he said, stepping closer, "I need to tell you." She rose on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, he froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as the kiss deepened. It was desperate and sweet and full of all the words they hadn't said. The rain poured over them, washing away the dust and fear and loneliness of months. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Boone rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Not as hired help, as whatever you'll have me as. Boone, I know it's not proper. I know people will talk, but I don't care anymore. These months with you and Tommy, they've been the best I've had since before the war, maybe the best ever." Eliza pulled back to look at him, this hard man who'd opened his guarded heart. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll let me court you, real and proper, despite how we started. I'm asking if maybe, someday, you might consider," he swallowed hard, "if you might consider making this permanent." Thunder crashed overhead, and Eliza realized they were both soaked through and likely to catch their death standing in the rain, but she couldn't bring herself to care. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes to courting. Yes to considering. Yes to trying." He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise rather than desperation. When they finally made their way inside, dripping and laughing like young fools, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. They dried off and changed in their separate rooms, propriety reasserting itself now that they were out of the storm's wild magic. But when Eliza emerged, Boone was waiting by the fire with 2 cups of coffee, made with the last of their water, she noted, but the rain would replenish their stores. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his cup. "To second chances," she replied, touching her cup to his. They sat together listening to the rain pound on the roof, washing the drought away, washing the past clean. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: the gossips in town, the work of rebuilding after the drought, the slow process of 2 damaged souls learning to trust again. But tonight, with the rain falling and the promise of growth returning to the land, anything seemed possible. The morning after the storm broke cold and clean, with puddles reflecting a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Eliza woke to find the world transformed, and Boone already gone to tend the horses. On the kitchen table lay a small bundle of wildflowers, still wet with rain, and no note. She didn't need one. At breakfast, he avoided her eyes, suddenly shy in the daylight. The passion of the storm seemed like a dream, something too fragile for the harsh light of day. Tommy chattered about the rain and the mud puddles he wanted to explore, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "I need supplies from town," Boone announced abruptly. "The rain'll bring everyone out. Good time to trade." "We'll come with you," Eliza offered, but he shook his head. "Better if I go alone. Less talk." The words stung, but she understood. Last night had changed everything and nothing. They still lived in a world where appearances mattered, where her reputation could affect his business. She nodded, keeping her face neutral. But as he prepared to leave, he paused by her chair. "Those flowers, they're growing by the creek. Thought you might like them." His fingers brushed her shoulder, so light she might have imagined it. "I'll be back before dark." She watched him ride away, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Hope warred with fear, desire with propriety. She'd thought herself done with wanting, done with trusting. Yet here she was, touching the wildflowers and remembering the taste of rain on his lips. The day dragged by. Eliza threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes that didn't need mending. Tommy helped her tend the vegetable garden, now flourishing with the promise of water. But her mind kept wandering to town, to what Boone might be hearing, to whether the magic of last night could survive the harsh realities of day. He returned as shadows were lengthening, his face grim. Eliza's heart sank as he dismounted, barely acknowledging her presence on the porch. "What happened?" "Nothing," but his jaw was tight, his movements sharp as he unsaddled his horse. "Got the supplies. Boone!" "Not now. Eliza." He disappeared into the barn, leaving her standing alone. Dinner was a silent affair. Even Tommy seemed to sense the shift in mood, eating quietly before asking to be excused. After he was in bed, Eliza couldn't stand it anymore. "Tell me what happened in town." Boone stared into his coffee cup. "Had a visitor at the general store, Tom Morrison." Eliza's blood chilled. Morrison was the most successful rancher in the territory, a man whose opinion carried weight. What did he say? "Offered to buy me out. Said a man in my position might want to consider a fresh start somewhere else. Somewhere without complications." He meant me. He meant us. Boone's voice was bitter. Also mentioned he'd heard from a cousin back east. "Seems there's talk about a woman who killed her husband. Description matches you pretty close." Eliza felt the room spin. She gripped the edge of the table. "Fighting nausea? I told you there was violence. I know what you told me." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable. "Question is, what didn't you tell me?" She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I protected my child. That's all that matters." "Is it?" He rose, too, facing her across the table. "What happens when someone comes looking? When the law shows up at my door? Is that what you're worried about? Your reputation? Your business?" Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I thought, after last night..." Last night was a mistake. The words fell between them like stones. "I let myself forget who we are. What's at stake? Can't afford to forget again." Eliza felt something break inside her chest. "I see. Then I'll pack our things in the morning." "That's not..." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not throwing you out. No, you're just making it clear we're unwelcome." She moved toward her room, pausing at the door. "I'm sorry. Boone, sorry I brought trouble to your door. Sorry I let myself hope." She closed the door on whatever he might have said, leaning against it as tears finally came. On the other side, she heard his footsteps. A pause. Then the sound of his own door closing. Sleep was impossible. Eliza packed by lamplight, folding their few possessions with mechanical precision. She'd been a fool to think she could outrun her past, a fool to believe in second chances. Come morning, she'd take Tommy and find somewhere else, always somewhere else. Near midnight, she heard it, the crash of glass, a muffled shout. She flew from her room to find Boone's door open, his room empty. The window was broken, curtains fluttering in the night breeze. "Boone!" She ran outside, heart pounding. In the moonlight, she saw him by the well, splashing water on his face. "What happened?" "Dream." His voice was rough. "Thought I saw. Doesn't matter." But she could see the blood on his hand where he'd punched through the window. Without thinking, she took his hand in both of hers, examining the cuts. "Come inside. This needs tending." "Leave it." "No." She tugged him toward the house. "You saved Tommy from the horse. You've sheltered us, fed us, protected us. The least I can do is bandage your hand." He followed reluctantly, sinking into a kitchen chair while she gathered supplies. As she cleaned the wounds, he spoke quietly. "It was Samuel, in the dream, standing at my window, asking why I let him die." His laugh was bitter. "Then he asked why I was letting you go." Eliza's hand stilled. "Boone, I can't lose anyone else." The words seemed torn from him. "When Morrison started talking, all I could think was, what if they take you away? What if I wake up and you're gone, just like everyone else? So you pushed us away first? Seemed safer." He looked at her with haunted eyes. "I'm a coward, Eliza. Always have been. Came home from the war and hid up here rather than face the world. Been hiding ever since." She finished wrapping his hand, but didn't let go. You're not a coward. You're wounded. We both are. What did he do to you? The question was gentle, but she could feel the rage underneath. Your husband. What did he do that made you... Eliza closed her eyes, memories flooding back. He was careful at first. Nothing that would show. Said it was my fault, that I made him angry. I believed him for so long. She took a shuddering breath. The night he died, he came home drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. He went for Tommy. Said the boy needed to learn respect. Boone's uninjured hand clenched into a fist. I got between them, Eliza continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. He knocked me down, went for Tommy again. There was a poker by the fireplace. I didn't think, just grabbed it, and she opened her eyes, meeting his gaze squarely. I hit him. He fell, hit his head on the hearth. There was so much blood. Good, Boone said fiercely. He deserved it. The sheriff said it was an accident, said Thomas had been drinking, must have stumbled, but people knew. They whispered, pointed. Some said I'd gotten away with murder. Others said I should have left instead of... So I ran, took Tommy and ran as far as I could. To me. His voice was wondering. Of all the places you could have gone, you came here. I came to the end of the line, she corrected. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. It became home. They sat in silence, hands still linked across the table. Finally, Boone spoke. I'm sorry, for what I said earlier, for being a coward. We're both scared, Eliza said softly. But maybe that's why we need each other. Maybe two scared people make one brave one. He stood, pulling her up with him. Don't leave, please. I know I've no right to ask, but... Shh. She placed a finger on his lips. I unpacked while you were at the well. Something shifted in his expression. Relief and wonder and something deeper. You did? Where else would we go? This is home now. You're... She stopped, uncertain how to finish. What am I? Eliza? He stepped closer, his good hand coming up to cup her cheek. Everything, she whispered. This time when he kissed her, it was different. No storm to blame, no passion to hide behind. Just two people choosing each other despite the fear, despite the past, despite what tomorrow might bring. When they finally parted, Boone rested his forehead against hers. I'll fight for you. If the law comes, if Morrison makes trouble, I'll fight. You and Tommy. You're mine now. My family. My responsibility. We're not your responsibility, Boone. We're your choice. There's a difference. He pulled back to look at her. Then I choose you. Both of you. Today, tomorrow. Whatever comes. And I choose you, she replied. Broken windows and all. He laughed, the sound rusty but real. We should get some sleep. Tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll face whatever comes. Together. But neither moved toward their separate rooms. Instead, they stood in the kitchen, holding each other in the lamplight. Two souls who'd found safe harbor in the storm of life. Finally, propriety and exhaustion won. Boone pressed a kiss to her forehead. Good night, Eliza. Good night. At her door, she turned back. Boone, thank you for the flowers. His smile transformed his face, making him look years younger. There'll be more tomorrow, every day, if you want them. I want them, she said softly. I want all the days. The next morning brought Jim Harper, the sheriff from Dust Creek. Eliza's heart nearly stopped when she saw his badge glinting in the morning sun. But he'd come about horse thieves working the territory, not about her past. Figured I should warn folks, Harper said, accepting coffee from Eliza's steady hands. They hit the Twisted River Ranch last week, took 6 horses. I'll keep watch, Boone promised. And Sheriff, this is Eliza Monroe, my fiancée. The words hung in the air. Eliza nearly dropped the coffee pot while Harper's eyebrows rose to his hairline. That's so? Well, congratulations to you both. He studied Eliza with sharp eyes. Monroe, you said. From back east? Yes, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Is that a problem? Not for me. I find folks out here are usually running from something or to something. Long as they don't bring trouble to my town. Their past is their business. After he left, Eliza turned to Boone. Fiancé. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Too soon? I can tell him I was mistaken. Don't you dare, she said, then laughed at his relieved expression. But you might try actually asking me first. Eliza Monroe, he said, taking her hands. Will you marry me? Not for propriety, not for protection, but because I love you. Because Tommy needs a father, and I need both of you more than I need my next breath. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. Tommy chose that moment to burst in, chattering about collecting eggs. He stopped, looking between them. Why are you holding hands? Because, Boone said, swinging the boy up into his arms. I'm going to marry your mama. That all right with you? Tommy's face lit up. Does that mean you'll be my papa? Boone's eyes met Eliza's over the boy's head. If you'll have me. I want that more than anything, Tommy said seriously, then brightened. Can I have a baby brother? Eliza blushed while Boone laughed, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth. Let's start with the wedding. Son. Son. The word hung in the air like a blessing, sealing the promise of the family they were choosing to become. Word of the engagement spread through the territory like wildfire. Within days, Boone found excuses to go to town, bringing back small gifts. A length of blue ribbon that matched Eliza's eyes, a carved wooden horse for Tommy, peppermint sticks from the general store. He was courting her properly, despite their unconventional beginning. But happiness was fragile in the frontier, and Eliza knew their past would catch up eventually. She just hadn't expected it to arrive in the form of Margaret Harrison, Thomas's sister, stepping down from the afternoon stage with fury in her eyes and a U.S. Marshal at her side. Eliza was in the garden when she saw the riders approaching. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized Margaret's rigid posture, even at a distance. She'd found them. Somehow, across all these miles, she'd found them. Tommy, she called, keeping her voice calm. Go find Mr. Boone in the barn. Tell him we have visitors. The boy ran off, and Eliza stood, brushing soil from her hands. She wouldn't run. Not this time. She'd face whatever came with her chin high. Margaret hadn't changed, still thin as a rail, with a face that seemed permanently pinched with disapproval. The marshal was younger than Eliza expected, with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his profession. Eliza, Margaret's voice dripped venom. Or should I say, Mrs. Monroe? Though I suppose that's not your name anymore, is it? Not after you murdered my brother. Mrs. Harrison. Eliza kept her voice steady. Marshal? Marshal Collins, ma'am. He touched his hat brim. I'm here to investigate the circumstances of Thomas Monroe's death. You mean you're here to arrest her? Margaret snapped. I've told you what she did. She killed him in cold blood and kidnapped my nephew. That's not, Eliza began, but Boone's voice cut through. What's going on here? He emerged from the barn with Tommy's hand in his expression darkening as he took in the scene. Eliza. This is Thomas's sister, Eliza said quietly. She's come to see justice done. Margaret finished. Marshal, arrest her. Collins dismounted slowly. Ma'am, as I explained during our journey, I need to investigate before taking any action. Mrs. Monroe. I'll need to hear your account of what happened that night. She'll lie? Margaret spat. Just like she lied to everyone back home. That's enough. Boone stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the visitors. You'll speak to her with respect, or you won't speak at all. Margaret's eyes narrowed. And who are you? Boone called her. This is my land, and Mrs. Monroe is under my protection. Protection? Margaret laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? I've heard about you two, living in sin, corrupting my nephew. Tommy's my son. Eliza's voice was steel. And I've protected him every day of his life, which is more than your brother ever did. How dare you? Because it's the truth. Eliza stepped around Boone, facing her sister-in-law directly. You know what he was. Margaret, you saw the bruises. You heard Tommy crying. And you did nothing. He was my brother. And Tommy was his son. But that didn't stop him from raising his fist to a 3-year-old child. Marshal Collins held up a hand. Ladies, please, Mrs. Monroe. I need to hear what happened that night. The truth, as clear as you can tell it. Eliza looked at Boone, drawing strength from his steady presence. Come inside. Marshal, I'll tell you everything. They gathered in the main room, Eliza and Boone on one side, Margaret glaring from a chair by the door, Marshal Collins in between with a small notebook. Tommy had been sent to play in his room, though Eliza could hear him moving around, undoubtedly listening at the door. It was March 15th, Eliza began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. Thomas came home from the saloon. He'd been drinking more than usual, lost money at cards. I think he was angry before he even walked through the door. She told it all. The years of violence, the escalating brutality, the fear that lived in her bones. Margaret made scoffing noises, but Collins listened intently, occasionally making notes. That night, he went for Tommy, said the boy needed to learn respect, needed to understand who was master in the house. I got between them. Her voice caught. He knocked me down, went for Tommy again. The poker was there, by the fireplace. I grabbed it and swung. I just wanted him to stop, just wanted him to leave Tommy alone. She murdered him, Margaret interjected. Struck him down like an animal. To protect her child, Boone said coldly. Any parent would have done the same. Collins looked up from his notebook. Mrs. Monroe, what happened after he fell? There was blood, so much blood. I checked for a pulse, but... She shuddered. I took Tommy and ran to the sheriff, told him everything. He came back with me, saw the scene. Said it looked like Thomas had stumbled, hit his head on the hearth, said drinking men often met such ends. Sheriff Paulson was getting old, Margaret said, probably half senile. Or she bribed him. With what? Eliza laughed bitterly. Thomas drank or gambled every penny we had. Collins closed his notebook. I'll need to send a telegram to verify your account with Sheriff Paulson. In the meantime, he looked between them. Mrs. Monroe, I'm not arresting you, but I need your word you won't leave the territory until this matter is resolved. She's not going anywhere. Boone said firmly. I can speak for myself. Eliza lifted her chin. You have my word. Marshal, this is my home now. I won't run. Margaret stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You're just going to leave her free? What about justice for my brother? Justice isn't the same as revenge, Mrs. Harrison. Collins said quietly. If the sheriff ruled it accidental death, and if Mrs. Monroe's account is verified, then the law has already spoken. Then the law is wrong. Margaret's face contorted with rage. She's bewitched you all with her pretty face and sad story, but I know the truth. She's a murderer and a whore, and I'll see her hang for it. Get out. Boone's voice was deadly quiet. Get off my land before I forget there's a lady present and show you what violence really looks like. Collins stood, placing a restraining hand on Margaret's arm. Come, Mrs. Harrison. We'll find lodging in town. He tipped his hat to Eliza. I'll be back when I have word from Sheriff Paulson. A few days at most. After they left, Eliza sank into a chair. Shaking, Boone knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. You did well, he said softly. Told the truth straight out. What if they don't believe me? What if... Then we'll face it together. I meant what I said. You're not going anywhere. Tommy crept out of his room, his small face worried. Mama? Was that Aunt Margaret? Eliza pulled him close. Yes, sweetheart. She said bad things about you. Sometimes people say bad things when they're hurting, Eliza explained carefully. Aunt Margaret misses your papa. Tommy was quiet for a moment. I don't miss him, he said finally. He was mean, Mr. Boone is better. Eliza met Boone's eyes over Tommy's head, seeing her own fierce protectiveness reflected there. Whatever came next, they'd face it as a family. The next days passed in tense waiting. Boone rarely left the homestead, keeping watch for trouble. Word spread quickly. The marshal's presence, Margaret's accusations, the investigation. Some neighbors stopped by to offer support, others to gawk. Through it all, Boone stood solid as a mountain beside her. On the third night, unable to sleep, Eliza found herself on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. Boone joined her, as she'd known he would. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Keep thinking about what you said, about the bruises, the fear, how long you lived that way." His voice was rough. "Makes me want to dig him up just to kill him again. He's gone. That's all that matters." "Is it?" He turned to her. "You still jump when doors slam. You still flinch when I move too fast. He's gone. But he left marks on you. They're fading," she said softly. "Every day here, they fade a little more." He pulled her against him, and she went willingly, finding comfort in his solid warmth. "I love you," he said simply. "Whatever happens, that won't change. I love you too." The words still felt new, precious. "Thank you for standing with me. Where else would I stand?" They stayed that way until the stars began to fade, drawing strength from each other for whatever dawn might bring. Marshal Collins returned the next afternoon, and Eliza's heart nearly stopped when she saw Margaret wasn't with him. That could mean anything, or nothing. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, dismounting. "Mr. Calder, I've heard from Sheriff Paulson." Eliza gripped Boone's hand. "Waiting. The sheriff confirms your account in every detail." He also sent along his notes from that night, including statements from neighbors about the nature of your marriage. Several people testified about seeing bruises, hearing arguments. Collins paused. He also mentioned that Thomas Monroe had been arrested twice for drunk and disorderly conduct, both times involving violence. "So?" Boone prompted when the marshal fell silent. "So, as far as the law is concerned, this matter was investigated and closed. Mrs. Monroe acted in defense of her child. No charges will be filed." Eliza's knees nearly buckled with relief. "And Margaret?" "Mrs. Harrison was unhappy with this decision. She's on a stage back east. I made it clear that any attempt at vigilante justice would be met with the full force of the law." He touched his hat. "You're free to live your life, ma'am. I'm sorry for the trouble." After he left, Eliza broke down completely, sobbing against Boone's chest while he held her. Years of fear, months of running, all of it finally over. She was free, truly, legally free. "It's done," Boone murmured against her hair. "You're safe. You're home." That night, for the first time since that terrible night in March, Eliza slept without nightmares. She woke to find Boone watching her, his expression soft in the dawn light. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking we should set a wedding date, make things official before any more surprises show up." She smiled. "Are you sure? I come with considerable baggage. Mr. Calder, we all have baggage. Yours just happened to show up with a badge." He kissed her gently. "Besides, I'm partial to your particular brand of trouble." "How romantic," she teased, but her heart was full. They were married 2 weeks later, in a simple ceremony at the homestead. Half the territory seemed to show up, curious about the woman who'd captured Boone Calder's heart and survived a murder investigation. Eliza wore her best dress, the blue one that matched the ribbon Boone had given her, and tried not to cry when Tommy proudly stood as Boone's best man. "Do you take this woman?" Reverend Walsh asked, having overcome his earlier objections in the face of their obvious happiness. "I do," Boone said firmly. "Today and every day after." "And do you take this man?" "I do," Eliza breathed. "For all the days we're given?" When Boone kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers. Tommy tugged on Boone's coat until the man lifted him up, and they stood there, a family forged by choice rather than blood, stronger for the trials they'd endured. That night, as wedding guests celebrated in the yard, Eliza slipped away to the porch. The stars were bright overhead, the air sweet with summer. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the fear, the flight, the desperate hope for something better. "No regrets?" Boone asked, joining her. "None," she said firmly. "You?" Only that it took so long to find you. He pulled her close. Mrs. Calder. I like the sound of that. She admitted. Eliza Calder. Like I was always meant to be. You were. He said simply. Just took us a while to figure it out. Inside, Tommy's laughter rang out over the music and conversation. Their son, their home, their life. Not the one either of them had planned, but better for being chosen, fought for, won against all odds. Ready to go back in? Boone asked. In a moment. Eliza leaned against him, savoring the peace. I want to remember this. All of it. The night we truly began. We began the night you knocked on my door, he corrected. Everything else was just finding our way. She smiled, thinking of that desperate woman who'd arrived in a cloud of dust, running from shadows. That woman was gone now, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that love could heal as surely as cruelty could wound. Then let's go in, she said. Our guests are waiting. Hand in hand, they returned to the celebration, to their son and their community and their future. Behind them, the stars continued their eternal dance, bearing witness to the truth that sometimes the endings we fear become the beginnings we need. The new sheriff arrived in Dust Creek 3 months after the wedding, on a day when September painted the plateau in shades of gold and rust. John Brennan was everything Jim Harper hadn't been, young, ambitious, and determined to make a name for himself by cleaning up what he saw as a lawless frontier town. Eliza first heard about him from Mrs. Patterson at the general store, where she'd gone to buy fabric for Tommy's new school clothes, asking questions about everyone. Mrs. Patterson whispered, leaning across the counter. Where they came from. What brought them here. Says he likes to know who's living in his jurisdiction. A chill ran down Eliza's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sure he's just being thorough. Thorough. Mrs. Patterson snorted. Mark my words. That young man is looking for trouble to prove himself. You and Boone be careful. Here? The warning echoed in Eliza's mind during the ride home. She'd thought the matter of Thomas's death was settled, but what if this new sheriff decided to dig deeper? What if Margaret had written to him, planted seeds of doubt? She found Boone in the corral, working with a young stallion. He took one look at her face and handed the lead rope to Tommy, who'd become quite accomplished with the horses. What's wrong? She told him about Sheriff Brennan, watched his jaw tighten with each word. It's probably nothing, she finished. Just a young man trying to do his job. Maybe. But Boone's expression remained troubled. We'll keep our ears open, if he starts sniffing around. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. They both knew their hard-won peace was more fragile than it appeared. Sheriff Brennan came calling a week later, his badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Eliza was alone. Boone had taken Tommy to look at horses at a neighboring ranch, and her hands trembled as she opened the door. Mrs. Calder? He was younger than she'd expected, with pale blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I'm Sheriff Brennan. I wonder if I might have a word? Of course. She stepped aside, proud that her voice remained steady. Would you like some coffee? That would be kind. She served him at the kitchen table, the same place where Marshall Collins had listened to her story months before. But this felt different. Brennan's eyes roamed the room, taking in every detail, before settling on her with uncomfortable intensity. I've been reviewing old cases, he began without preamble, making sure justice was properly served. Your previous husband's death caught my attention. That matter was investigated and closed, Eliza said carefully. By Sheriff Paulson. Yes, but he's retired now. And some of his decisions. Brennan paused, sipping his coffee. Let's say they raise questions. What kind of questions? The kind that wonder why a woman who killed her husband was allowed to simply leave town. The kind that ask if perhaps Sheriff Paulson was too sympathetic to a pretty face. Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks. Sheriff Paulson did his job. He investigated thoroughly and found that Thomas Monroe accidentally fell and hit his head after being struck with a poker. Brennan's smile was thin. Quite a coincidence. It was self-defense. He was attacking our son. So you claimed. But there were no witnesses. Were there? Just your word against a dead man's? Eliza stood abruptly. I think you should leave. Sheriff, if you have questions about the investigation, I suggest you contact Marshal Collins. He reviewed the case just this summer. Brennan rose slowly, that unsettling smile still in place. Oh, I intend to be very thorough, Mrs. Calder. You see, I believe in justice. Real justice, not the frontier variety where sob stories excuse murder. Get out. She didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone made him step back. Get out of my home. Of course, but we'll speak again. He touched his hat brim mockingly. Give my regards to your husband. I'll be wanting to talk to him too. After he left, Eliza sank into a chair, shaking. The peace she'd found, the happiness she'd built. Was it all about to crumble? When Boone returned, his face darkened with each word of her account. He threatened you. Not exactly. But he made his intentions clear. She gripped his hands. What if he finds something? What if... Hey! Boone pulled her close. We'll handle this together, like always. But over the following weeks, Sheriff Brennan's investigation cast a shadow over their lives. He wrote to authorities back east, interviewed anyone who'd known them, and made his presence felt at every turn. When they went to town, conversations stopped. People who'd been friendly grew distant, not wanting to be associated with whatever scandal might emerge. The breaking point came when Tommy returned from school in tears. What happened? Sweetheart? Eliza knelt beside him, heartbreaking at his sobs. Billy Morrison said his PA told him to stay away from me. Said my mama's a killer and might hurt him too. Boone's fist slammed into the wall, making them both jump. That's enough. This ends now. Boone, what are you going to do? What I should have done weeks ago. Have a conversation with our ambitious young sheriff. He was gone before she could stop him. Eliza spent the next hours pacing, trying to comfort Tommy while fear gnawed at her insides. When Boone finally returned near midnight, his knuckles were split but his expression was calmer. What happened? We talked. He flexed his hand, wincing. He understands now that his investigation is over. Boone, I didn't threaten him, if that's what you're worried about. Just made it clear that harassing my family would have consequences. Legal consequences. Turns out our Sheriff Brennan has some irregularities in his past too. A gambling debt in Kansas that mysteriously disappeared when he left town. How did you... I've made friends over the years. Some of them have interesting connections. He touched her face gently. He'll back off. But Eliza, we need to consider something else. What? Leaving. Starting fresh somewhere no one knows our past. The suggestion hit her like a physical blow. Leave? But this is our home. You built this place. Your life is here. You and Tommy are my life, he said firmly. Everything else is just land and horses. That night, they lay awake discussing possibilities. California, where gold rush towns welcomed anyone willing to work. Oregon, with its promise of fresh starts. Even Mexico, where American law couldn't follow. But each option meant abandoning everything they'd built, the community they'd finally become part of, the grave where Samuel rested. I don't want to run anymore, Eliza said finally. I've been running since March. I'm tired of it. Then we stay and fight. How? Brennan may have backed off for now, but what about the next sheriff? Or the next person Margaret convinces to seek justice? How do we fight shadows? Boone was quiet for a long moment. There might be another way. The next morning, he rode out early, returning near dusk with Judge Harrison Porter, the circuit judge who'd been a friend of Boone's father. The old man's presence filled the room with quiet authority. Mrs. Calder, he greeted, accepting coffee with a nod of thanks. Boone's told me your situation. I've also heard Sheriff Brennan's version. Thought it might be time for some judicial clarity. I don't understand, Eliza began, but the judge held up a hand. 4 years ago, I presided over a similar case. Woman killed her husband defending her children. Local sheriff ruled it accidental, but questions persisted. So I did something unusual. I convened a formal inquest, brought in witnesses, examined evidence, rendered an official verdict that no prosecutor could later challenge. Hope bloomed in Eliza's chest. Would you do that for me? Already started the paperwork. We'll convene next month when I'm officially in town. You'll tell your story. Under oath. We'll bring in anyone who has relevant testimony. And when it's done, this matter will be settled permanently. No ambitious sheriff or vengeful relative can reopen it. Tears burned Eliza's eyes. Thank you. I don't know how to... Don't thank me yet. This won't be easy. You'll have to relive that night in public, face hard questions. But if you're willing... I'm willing, Eliza said firmly. I want this finished. For Tommy, for Boone, for all of us. The judge nodded approvingly. Boone, you picked a strong one. Don't I know it? Boone said, pride clear in his voice. Word of the inquest spread quickly. Some saw it as unnecessary drama, others as long overdue justice. Sheriff Brennan was notably silent, his investigation officially suspended pending the judge's verdict. The night before the inquest, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching clouds drift across the moon, when Boone's arms encircled her from behind. Scared? Terrified, she admitted. What if they don't believe me? What if... They will. His certainty warmed her. You'll tell the truth, just like you did with Marshall Collins, and this time, it'll be official, legal, permanent. I killed a man. Boone, however justified. I took a life. That marks a person. He turned her to face him. You saved a life. Tommy's, maybe your own. That marks a person too, but not the way you think. He kissed her forehead. It marks you as someone who'll do whatever it takes to protect the innocent. That's not a sin. Eliza, that's courage. The inquest convened in the town hall, packed with curious observers. Judge Porter presided with solemn dignity, while Eliza sat at a table facing him, Boone at her side. Sheriff Brennan sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. State your name for the record. Judge Porter began. Eliza Monroe Calder. And so it began. She told the story again, but this time in exhaustive detail. The years of abuse, the escalation, the fear that lived in her bones. Several women in the audience wiped away tears as she described trying to hide bruises, making excuses for black eyes. The night of March 15th, Judge Porter prompted. Tell us exactly what happened. Eliza closed her eyes, letting herself remember. Thomas came home after midnight. He'd been drinking. I could smell it as soon as he walked in. He was angry about losing at cards. Tommy had left a toy on the floor. Thomas tripped over it. She described the rage, the way Thomas had grabbed Tommy, shaken him, the sound of her son's terrified screams, the poker cold in her hand. I didn't think, she said, opening her eyes. I just knew I had to stop him. I swung with all my strength. He let go of Tommy, turned toward me. Then he fell. Did you mean to kill him? No. Her voice was steady now. I meant to save my son. Nothing more, nothing less. Judge Porter called other witnesses. Mrs. Davies from back east, who'd traveled out specially, testified about seeing Eliza's bruises. Dr. Mills confirmed treating her for a broken rib the previous year. Even Sheriff Paulson, elderly but still sharp, made the journey to defend his investigation. I've seen plenty of accidental deaths, the old sheriff said. And I've seen murder. What happened in that house was a woman defending her child. Nothing more. I'd rule the same way today. Finally, Judge Porter addressed the room. The law recognizes the right of defense, particularly in protection of children. The evidence presented clearly shows a pattern of violence that culminated in a tragic but justifiable action. It is the verdict of this inquest that Eliza Monroe Calder acted in lawful defense of her minor child. This matter is closed, now and forever. Any attempt to prosecute or harass Mrs. Calder regarding this incident will be met with charges of malicious prosecution. The gavel fell with finality. Eliza sagged against Boone, tears flowing freely. Around them, the crowd erupted in mixed reactions, some approving, others disappointed by the lack of scandal, but none of that mattered. It was over. Truly, legally, permanently over. Outside the town hall, Mrs. Patterson pressed Eliza's hand. Brave girl, takes courage to stand up and tell the truth like that. Others offered similar words, and Eliza realized something had shifted. By facing the past publicly, she'd transformed from the mysterious widow to a survivor, a protector, a woman who'd done what was necessary. Sheriff Brennan paused beside them as the crowd dispersed. Mrs. Calder, he said stiffly. I apologize for any distress my investigation caused. I was overzealous in my pursuit of justice. Justice was already served. Sheriff, Boone said coldly, you just couldn't see it. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he nodded and walked away. Within a month, they'd hear he'd taken a position in another territory. Dust Creek would get another new sheriff, but this one would know better than to dig up closed cases. That night, as they tucked Tommy into bed, he looked up at them with solemn eyes. Does this mean people won't say mean things anymore? Some people always say mean things, Eliza said gently. But now everyone knows the truth. That's what matters. I already knew the truth. Tommy said simply, you saved me. That makes you a hero. After he fell asleep, Eliza and Boone sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. The weight that had pressed on Eliza's shoulders for so long was finally gone. How do you feel? Boone asked. Free, she said after a moment. Really, truly free. Good, he pulled her close. Because I've been thinking about the future. About maybe adding to the horse operation, building that bigger house we talked about, making plans that go beyond just surviving. I'd like that, Eliza said softly. I'd like that very much. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. The fear, the flight, the desperate hope for something better. She'd found so much more than safety. She'd found love, family, home, and now, finally, she'd found justice too. Not the vengeful kind Margaret had sought, but the kind that acknowledged truth and allowed for healing. Thank you, she whispered to Boone. For what? For standing by me, for fighting for us, for helping me see that I'm not marked by what I did, but by why I did it. He kissed her temple. You're marked by courage. Eliza Calder. Always have been. Just took the rest of us a while to see it. Inside, Tommy called out in his sleep, not in fear, but just the restless sounds of a child's dreams. Eliza smiled, knowing she'd answer that call every time. Face any threat, weather any storm. That's what mothers did. That's what survivors did. That's what love demanded. And finally, blessedly, the world understood. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, 6 months after the inquest that had finally laid the past to rest. Eliza stood before the small mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the crown of wildflowers Tommy had picked for her that morning. Through the window, she could see guests arriving, neighbors who had become friends, townspeople who had witnessed their journey from scandal to acceptance. You look beautiful, Mama, Tommy said from the doorway. Dressed in his finest clothes, a new suit Boone had insisted on buying in Denver. Thank you, sweetheart. She knelt to straighten his collar. Are you happy about today? The happiest, he said solemnly. Now, mister, Boone will really be my papa, not just pretend. He's been your papa in every way that matters for a while now, Eliza said, thinking of all the patient lessons, the bedtime stories, the fierce protectiveness Boone had shown her son. I know, but now it's official. Tommy's face brightened. And maybe I'll get that baby brother we talked about. Eliza blushed, standing quickly. One thing at a time. Young man, let's get through the wedding first. Outside, she could hear Boone's voice directing the setup. He'd insisted on hosting the ceremony at the homestead, saying he wanted to marry her where their life together had truly begun. The barn had been decorated with ribbons and flowers, benches arranged for guests, and tables laden with food prepared by the neighbor women. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson entered, beaming. Oh, my dear, you're a vision. that Boone Calder won't know what hit him.
I think he knows exactly what's hitting him.
Eliza laughed.
He's had months to reconsider. That man would wait decades for you.
Mrs., Patterson said firmly.
The way he looks at you, well, it reminds me of my own dear husband. God rest his soul. That's a love built to last. Mark my words.
As Eliza made her way to the barn, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The desperate woman who had knocked on Boone's door that snowy night seemed like a stranger now. That woman had been running from life. This one was running toward it. Boone stood at the makeshift altar, looking uncomfortable in his formal clothes, but more handsome than she'd ever seen him. His face transformed when he saw her, the stern lines softening into something that took her breath away. Reverend Walsh, who had come so far from his initial disapproval, smiled as she approached. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather today to witness something rare and precious. Two souls who have found their way through darkness to light, through solitude to companionship, through fear to love." The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but ordinary. When Boone promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice caught on the words. When Eliza vowed to stand by him in sickness and health, she thought of the nightmares they'd already weathered, the storms they'd survived. "Do you, Thomas," the Reverend asked, turning to Tommy, "accept this union, welcoming Boone as your father in the eyes of God and law?" "I do," Tommy said proudly, "with my whole heart." It wasn't part of the traditional ceremony, but Boone had insisted. Family wasn't just about the adults. He'd said it was about all of them choosing each other. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife, and," the Reverend added with a smile, "a family bound by choice and love. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Calder." The kiss was sweet and sure, a promise sealed before witnesses who had seen their struggles and celebrated their triumph. Around them, applause erupted, and Tommy whooped with joy. The celebration that followed was everything Eliza had never dared dream of. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Fiddle music filled the air, and laughter echoed across the plateau. She danced with Boone, with Tommy, with neighbors who had become friends. Even Judge Porter had made the journey, raising a toast to courage in all its forms. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Eliza slipped away from the festivities for a moment of quiet. She found herself at the small garden she'd planted near the house, where Samuel's marker stood among the growing things. "We made it," she whispered to the stone. "Your brother and I, we found our way. I hope that brings you peace." "Talking to Sam," Boone's voice came from behind her.
"Thanking him,"
she said, leaning back against her husband's solid warmth. "If he hadn't been your brother, if losing him hadn't brought you here, we never would have found each other. He would have liked you," Boone said quietly. "Would have teased me mercilessly about taking so long to see what was right in front of me." They stood together as twilight deepened, the sounds of celebration continuing behind them. This was what she'd dreamed of in her darkest hours, not just safety, but belonging, not just survival, but joy. "Come on, Mrs. Calder," Boone said finally. "Our guests are waiting." "Our family," she corrected, and felt the truth of it warm her from within. The party continued late into the night, with stories shared and toasts raised, when Tommy finally fell asleep on a bench, worn out from excitement. Boone carried him to bed while Eliza said goodbye to the last guests. Alone, at last, they stood on the porch where so many of their important moments had unfolded. The night was clear, stars spreading across the sky like scattered diamonds. "No regrets?" Boone asked, echoing his question from months before. "Not one," Eliza said firmly. "This is where I belong, where we belong." He pulled her close, and she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "I never thought I'd have this again. Family, laughter, hope for tomorrow. You gave me all that. We gave each other that," she corrected. "That's what partners do." Partners, he repeated, smiling. I like that, though wife has a nice sound too. Both, she said. I'll be both. Inside the house, Tommy stirred in his sleep, calling out. Without hesitation, both adults moved toward his room, united in purpose as they'd been united in ceremony. They found him sitting up, rubbing his eyes. Bad dream? Eliza asked, smoothing his hair. No, Tommy said sleepily. Good dream. Dreamed we were all together, but wanted to make sure it was real. It's real, son, Boone said, the word son still new enough to carry weight. We're all here, all together. Forever. Forever, Eliza and Boone said in unison. As they tucked him back in, Eliza caught Boone's eye. There would be challenges ahead. There always were in life. Hard winters, dry summers, the ordinary struggles of making a living on the frontier, but they would face them together. This family forged by choice rather than chance, stronger for the fires they'd passed through. Later, as they prepared for bed in the room they now officially shared, Boone said, I've been thinking about adding onto the house, another bedroom or two, maybe a proper parlor, planning a lot of guests, Eliza teased, though her heart beat faster at the implication. Planning for the future, he said simply, whatever it might hold. She moved into his arms, feeling safe and cherished and alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. I love our life, she whispered. I love our family. I love you. And I love you, he replied. The widow who arrived in tears, the woman who faced down her demons, the wife who stands beside me now. I love all of you. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, but it no longer sounded lonely to Eliza. It sounded like wildness calling to wildness, like freedom itself. She'd come so far from the frightened woman who'd heard that sound her first night in the barn, seeing threats in every shadow. Now she knew better. Shadows were just the absence of light, and she'd found light in abundance, in Boone's steady presence, in Tommy's laughter, in the community that had ultimately embraced them. The tears that had brought her here had long since dried, replaced by something stronger and more lasting. As they settled into bed, Boone's hand found hers in the darkness. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For knocking on my door that night, for refusing to leave when I tried to send you away, for bringing life back to this place. I was just looking for shelter, she said softly. I found so much more. We both did. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the familiar sounds of home, wind in the eaves, horses shifting in the barn, Tommy's peaceful breathing from the next room. Tomorrow would bring its own rhythms, chores and meals, work and rest, the ordinary miracles of daily life. But tonight was for remembering how far they'd come and dreaming of where they might go. Boone? Eliza said into the darkness. I'm not the widow who arrived in tears anymore. No, he agreed, pulling her closer. You're Eliza Calder, my wife, Tommy's mother, the strongest woman in Wyoming territory. And you're exactly where you belong. She smiled against his shoulder, feeling the truth of it in her bones. The past was truly past now, buried as surely as Thomas in his distant grave. What remained was this: love and trust, partnership and promise, a future stretching out like the vast Wyoming sky. In the barn, the new foal whinnied softly, and its mother answered with reassuring sounds. On the porch, the rocking chair Boone had made creaked gently in the breeze, and in the house on the plateau, 3 hearts beat in harmony, a family complete at last. The widow had indeed arrived in tears, but she'd found something worth every tear shed, a love that could withstand storms, a home that welcomed all who entered, and a future bright with possibility. In the end, that's what the best love stories were about. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of hope. Not the perfection of the journey, but the joy of the destination. And as sleep finally claimed them, Eliza's last thought was of gratitude, for second chances, for patient love, for the cowboy who'd helped her remember that even the most wounded heart could learn to trust again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new blessings, but tonight, all was well in their corner of the world. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But in the house below, human hearts had written their own constellation, a story of loss and redemption, of courage and compassion, of two broken people who'd found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. And if that wasn't worth celebrating, nothing was. Thank you so much for joining me on this emotional journey through the Wild West. I hope Eliza and Boone's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening to this story from? I'd love to hear from listeners all around the world. If you enjoyed this tale of love, redemption, and second chances, please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? Did the ending satisfy you? Let's discuss this beautiful story together.